Elderly janitor breaks down at work. Then Princess Catherine walks in with a surprise. He cleaned their floors for 42 years. Most didn't even know his name. Every morning, before the sun lit up the schoolyard, Arthur Bell was already there unlocking the side gate, switching on the flickering hallway lights, and tightening the frayed drawstring on his faded blue janitor's smock. He didn't rush. He never had. His steps were careful, like a man who understood that even quiet spaces deserved respect. The students called him Mr. Bell when they remembered. Most just mumbled, "Sir," or passed by with earbuds in and backpacks thumping against their backs. Teachers nodded politely. A few asked how his weekend had been but rarely waited for the answer. Arthur never took it personally. He wasn't there to be seen. He wiped handprints from doors that had forgotten who pushed them, picked up wrappers from floors where sneakers ran too fast, polished the brass edges of the assembly stage no one remembered he'd built. His routine was carved from muscle memory. Mop, bucket, hallway, classroom, repeat. Lunch was a peanut butter sandwich in the boiler room. Breaks were minutes leaning against the janitor's cart, with a crossword puzzle that never got finished. He had a locker once middle of the row, dented at the corners, filled with old thermos cups, and a photograph of his late wife smiling beside a sunflower field. But that morning, it was empty. No warning, no note, just hollow space where his coat used to hang and his flask used to sit. He stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. A voice behind him said, "New hire starts Monday. Budget stuff, nothing personal." He nodded, said, "Sure." That was it. And then he grabbed his mop. No one asked if he was okay. No one noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he dipped the handle into water. No one saw the photo in his pocket, creased at the corners, now bent with silent weight. Arthur wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Just tired. 42 years of keeping the building upright while the world changed around him. 42 years of quiet hellos, broken pencils, and floors so clean you could see your doubt in them. Inside something cracked, but outside, Arthur just kept wiping. The floor needed to shine, and that was the moment while pushing the mop down the east hallway that the front doors opened. He didn't turn at first. He just heard footsteps, softer than most, slower, measured, like someone walking with purpose, not urgency. He looked up. It wasn't a teacher. It wasn't a student. It was someone the school never expected to see, someone who didn't pass him by, someone who stopped and looked straight at him. And in that one glance, everything began to shift. Sometimes it only takes one person to see what everyone else ignored. She didn't come with cameras, just a coat, kindness, and a question. The staff hadn't expected her. The palace had kept it quiet, no press vans, no handlers rehearsing small talk. Just one car, one driver, and a princess wrapped in a soft blue coat stepping into the tiled halls of a Birmingham primary school. There was no speech, no ceremony. She shook hands like it wasn't royal. Just warm, familiar. "I'm here to listen," she said simply. "And to learn." The head teacher walked beside her with visible pride. "We're piloting a new emotional literacy module this term. It's been transformative." Catherine smiled as she passed vibrant drawings, taped to the walls, echoes of laughter bouncing from one room to the next. "Do the children enjoy it?" "They do," the teacher said quickly. "We've seen fewer outbursts, better focus. They're learning to name their feelings instead of act them out." They paused briefly outside a Year 2 classroom where little heads bobbed over picture books. The children didn't notice her. That seemed to make her smile wider. "This is good work," she said, and she meant it. But then, just past the music room, down the quieter wing of the building, her eyes drifted, drawn by movement, not noise. Near the back, a man in a faded jumper swept slowly along the edge of the hallway. Not rushed, not invisible either. Just separate. He was older, maybe in his 70s. His hands looked steady but tired. He worked without looking up. "Who's that?" Catherine asked gently. The head teacher glanced over. "Oh, that's just Arthur, our caretaker. He's been here, well, forever, really." She nodded, like that answered something, but she didn't look away. Arthur moved, with a quiet kind of rhythm. Like he'd learned the creaks of the floor and the stories in the walls long before anyone else had walked through them. They kept walking. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Because Catherine had noticed the one man the building seemed to move around instead of through. Later that afternoon, as tea was being poured in the staff room, she set her cup down and asked softly, "Would it be all right if I spoke with Arthur for a moment?" The head teacher blinked. Of course. He's usually in the supply room by now. Shall I call him?" She shook her head. "No need. I'll go to him." Because sometimes the quietest man in the hallway holds the loudest story in the building. She asked about the mop. He told her about a life. Catherine found him crouched in the supply closet, folding towels into tight, perfect squares. The mop leaned against the wall, still damp, as if it had been forgotten mid-task. The room smelled faintly of lemon and old floor wax. Arthur didn't look up right away. "Mind if I sit?" she asked gently. He nodded once, not stopping his hands. She sat on an overturned bucket nearby, knees almost touching his. "How long have you been here?" she asked after a pause. Arthur smiled, just barely. "Since before you were born," he said. At first his voice was quiet, as though each word needed permission to leave. But something about the way she stayed unhurried, fully present, made space for the rest. He told her about the sets he used to paint for the school plays, backdrops with paper moons and cardboard castles. He said he'd always been better with brushes than with words. "The kids used to call me Mr. Magic. Hands?" He chuckled softly. "Guess they thought I could make anything out of nothing." Catherine didn't laugh, but her eyes warmed. He told her about his wife, how she used to leave him handwritten notes in his lunchbox. How, after she passed, the school became more than a job. "It gave me something to do with my hands," he said, "and a place where I wasn't just a man grieving." His hands stopped folding for a second. Then he picked up another towel. "I thought maybe I mattered," he said, voice thinner now, "until they cleared out my locker one weekend. No note. Just gone. Said it was reassigned. I guess old things get replaced when they stop shining." Catherine didn't rush to fill the silence. She didn't nod politely or offer a prepackaged kindness. She just sat with him, letting his words hang in the air, giving them the dignity of space. He glanced at her, uncertain. "You're probably too young to care about stories like that." She shook her head slowly. "That's not true," she said. And it was the only thing she said, because she didn't come to fix him. She came to listen. And she didn't offer sympathy. She offered something stronger, attention. And with nothing more than presence, Catherine had begun to mend something no one else had noticed was broken. There's a kind of grief that doesn't cry, it just stops talking. Arthur knew that kind. He wore it quietly in the way his footsteps barely echoed anymore. Years ago, his laugh filled these same hallways deep, rolling, contagious. Children used to run to him, tug at his sleeves, ask for extra erasers like they were treasure. Back then, he knew every classroom's rhythm, every teacher's quirks, every child's favorite color. And he was needed, not just noticed, but the building changed. Budgets tightened, principals rotated. New staff didn't ask his name, they read it off a badge, if at all. Slowly, Arthur faded. First from meetings, then from greetings. Eventually, from memory. Not maliciously, just quietly. Like dust gathering in corners no one sweeps anymore. He still showed up. Still clocked in early, walked the halls like a caretaker of time itself. He wiped down desks even before teachers arrived. Watered plants that didn't belong to him. Tucked away coats left behind. And sometimes on quiet mornings he'd stop outside room 3C. The desk by the window still caught light the same way. His wife used to volunteer there, before the chemo, before the silence. No one asked why he paused there. No one remembered she had once read to the kids every Tuesday, bringing in cookies wrapped in cloth napkins. No one remembered, but Arthur did. He knew names. Not just of the children now, but the ones from 10 years ago. He remembered which ones hummed while they colored, which ones stuttered when nervous, which ones asked to sit near the door because loud sounds made them flinch. He remembered, so when Catherine found him outside that same room, his clothes tucked under one arm, gaze distant, she didn't speak at first. just watched, gently, respectfully. And then, without fanfare, she stepped closer. "You remember more than this building ever did," she said. Arthur looked at her, surprised not by her presence, but by the fact that someone had finally seen him. "I just keep things tidy," he replied, half smiling. But she shook her head. "No," she said softly. "You keep it alive." For a moment he didn't respond, just nodded slowly, eyes wet with something he hadn't let surface in years. Not because he didn't feel, but because no one had asked. And then she made a call, one that would rewrite the day entirely. Because sometimes all it takes to be seen is for someone to look with intention. There were no banners, no script, just a room and a reason. The gym at St. Albans hadn't seen a full assembly in years. Not since before the budget cuts, before the scaffolding crept up the back wall and never came down. But that morning, after the last bell rang and students filed out to lunch, a quiet ripple moved through the halls. Princess Catherine had asked for a small gathering. No formal program, no media press. Just a request. The teachers scrambled. Folding chairs were dragged into rows. A borrowed mic crackled on a makeshift podium. Staff whispered to each other. Was it a photo op? A quick royal wave for the news? Nobody knew. But nobody said no. Students were called in, confused but curious. They shuffled into the gym with half-finished sandwiches and restless energy. Phones stayed in pockets. There was no announcement, no anthem, no introductions, just Princess Catherine standing quietly near the stage. Calm, focused. And then Arthur Bell was ushered in almost as an afterthought. He stood at the back by the double doors, mop still in hand. Confused, tired. Still wearing the same blue smock he always did. He didn't want to be there. Until she spoke. "I know you weren't expecting this," Catherine said softly into the mic. Her voice didn't need to rise. It just settled over the room like a slow tide. "And neither was I, really." She smiled gently, then looked toward the back of the gym. "I came here today expecting to learn about education. I met someone who's been giving a different kind of education for 42 years. Students shifted in their seats. "I'd like you all to meet someone you already know, but may not have truly seen." She paused. Arthur turned to leave, slow and quiet like always. He didn't like attention, especially not this kind. But her next words stopped him cold. He never asked to be seen. He never asked for thanks. But he kept showing up, every single day. When the lights were still off. When the floors were still dirty. When this place needed someone to care. The gym was silent. She turned fully toward him. "Mr. Bell, we invited you here today not to say goodbye, but to say, finally, that we see you." Arthur's hands froze on the mop handle. One student near the front blinked in recognition. Then another. Then a wave of murmurs moved through the room. "That's the guy who fixed my locker in year 7, someone whispered. "He cleaned the cafeteria every single day," said another. Teachers nodded slowly, remembering more than they had let themselves notice. Arthur didn't move. Not yet. But something in his chest did. A shift. The kind you don't expect. The kind that hurts a little only because it finally means something. For 42 years, he walked these halls unseen. Now the entire school was looking right at him. She didn't speak about royalty. She spoke about janitors. Catherine stood at the edge of the assembly hall, not behind a podium, but just beside a small table where her notes rested neatly folded, gently used. She looked out, not at a crowd, but at a community. "There's a man in this building," she began, her voice steady, "whose name most of you know, but whose story, I think, many of you don't." She glanced to her left. Arthur stood, in the corner, still wearing his worn jumper, still unsure why he was here at all. Catherine unfolded the paper. In 1984, Arthur Ellis joined this school. He wasn't hired to teach, but he did. Every day, quietly, faithfully. A few students turned. A few teachers leaned forward. In 1986, when the gym ceiling leaked just hours before the year-end assembly, he fixed it with a tarp, a ladder, and one borrowed umbrella. That night, no one clapped for him. But he was the last one to leave. She looked up. "Some of you weren't born yet, but you've all walked past his work. Her eyes returned to the page. In 1997, a young teacher cried in her classroom at 11:43 p.m., frustrated, overwhelmed, and alone with a broken projector. Arthur stayed, not just to fix it, but to listen. A murmur passed through the staff. One woman put her hand over her mouth. In 2003, when budget cuts forced the school to cancel the art program, he stayed after hours, painting a mural with donated brushes and leftover paint. It showed children reading beneath trees, reaching for stars. She paused. That mural is now painted over, but it lived, and it mattered. Silence stretched not empty but full. He never asked to be seen, but he was always here, sweeping when no one clapped, painting when no one asked, listening when no one else had the time. Her voice softened. Arthur Ellis is not just your caretaker. He is your memory keeper. The room shifted. Heads turned toward him. Slowly. And then it happened first. A clap, soft and unsure. Then another, and another, until the hall was filled with something it had never given him before. Recognition. Arthur didn't move. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to do with all that light. His eyes welled. His hands stayed at his sides. For a man used to holding tools, he suddenly didn't know what to hold. Catherine stepped back. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a speech. She'd made space. But Catherine wasn't done, not even close. Some people never ask for recognition, so she gave it anyway. The school's main hall was filled not with ceremony, but with warmth. No grand music, no official script, just students, teachers, and the hum of curiosity as a large cloth-covered frame stood waiting near the front. Catherine didn't say much, she didn't have to. The room was already holding its breath. She stepped forward, one hand resting briefly on the curtain. We forget sometimes, she began softly, that the people who shape a place the most rarely stand in the spotlight. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd. She looked toward the corner, where Arthur stood near the back, his uniform neat, hands folded, eyes down. So, she continued, we decided to fix that. With one slow pull, the curtain fell away. Behind it was a portrait, painted in soft oils, rich and warm. Arthur Bell, seated in his work coat, mop resting beside him like a staff. The kind of image usually reserved for headmasters or donors. But this wasn't stiff or formal. It was human, lived in, true. Below the frame, a small brass plaque caught the light. Arthur Bell, 42 years of quiet service. At first there was silence. Then it cracked gentle gasps, then applause, then a small cheer from the back row that broke open a wave of clapping. Someone whispered, "He's crying." Arthur stepped forward slowly, as if unsure whether the moment truly belonged to him. He reached the base of the frame, staring up at the face looking back. "That's me?" he whispered. Catherine nodded, standing beside him. "It always was." He blinked, as though seeing his own story for the first time. Not as background noise, not as maintenance, but as legacy. A few students had tears in their eyes. One of the younger boys clapped with both hands over his heart. A teacher brushed her cheek quietly, smiling through it. Arthur's fingers reached toward the edge of the frame, not to touch, just to feel how close it was. No one spoke for a while, because there was nothing to add. He wasn't a ghost in the hallway anymore. He was part of the walls, the paint, the breath of the school itself. And for the first time in decades, Arthur didn't feel invisible. And what began as a painting became something far deeper, a mirror that finally told him he mattered. They gave him a chair, but not to work, to rest. It appeared quietly one morning beneath the old oak tree by the playground. A wooden bench, smooth and solid, with a small bronze plaque that simply read, "For Arthur who never left." No ribbon, no ceremony, just warmth, as if the school had finally decided to breathe, to remember, to say, "We see you now." Arthur didn't ask for it. He would have been embarrassed by the idea, but when he saw it, something in his shoulders softened. Like the weight he carried for years had been quietly lifted without anyone making a fuss. At first he just sat, unsure if it was really meant for him. But then came a boy with a gap-toothed grin, plopping beside him, asking, "Were you here when my big sister came to this school?" Arthur chuckled. "I was here when your mom did." Soon others joined, one by one. Some with stories, others with questions. They sat close, like he had always been part of the circle, they just hadn't known where to place him before. Now they knew. He brought a book the next day. An old one, with cracked edges, and a cover that had seen better years. "This one's about a fox," he told them. "A little one who didn't know how brave he was until someone told him." The kids leaned in, eyes wide. Not because of the plot, but because Arthur's voice made it feel real. On Fridays, a teacher brought him tea sweet, with just a bit of lemon. A parent passed by once, recognized him, and waved like an old friend. "You're still here?" she asked, smiling. "Thank God." No one called him Sir. No one said Janitor. They called him Mr. Arthur. Or just Arthur. And in those shaded afternoons beneath the oak, he didn't feel like he'd been left behind. He felt held. Finally. Fully. Quietly. The bench wasn't just wood and screws. It was memory made solid. A place where time slowed down long enough for a man to catch up to it. A place where he could be more than what his job had asked of him. A place where children learned that sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They carry brooms, tuck in chairs, and remember your name even after you've forgotten theirs. And as Arthur leaned back one afternoon, a soft breeze moving through the branches above, he closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to feel. To feel what it was like to belong. Again. But Princess Catherine still had one last chapter to write. Because sometimes the most powerful throne is a bench beneath a tree. It arrived on a Wednesday. Plain envelope. No fanfare. No courier in uniform. Just a soft knock on Arthur Bell's door, and a letter slipped through the slot. He didn't notice it right away. He was folding laundry, the way he always did, one slow shirt at a time. The kettle on. The window cracked for breeze. It wasn't until he reached for the broom leaning by the front door that he saw it, white paper, thick as cardstock, with a wax seal pressed into the back. He stood still for a moment, staring at it. Then he picked it up with the same care he used to set his late wife's teacups on the drying rack. The crest on the seal was unmistakable. And inside, her handwriting. Not the formal script of a royal secretary, but something looser. Personal. Real. "Dear Mr. Bell," it began. "I wanted to thank you once more, not for your work, but for your presence." Arthur's hand trembled slightly as he sat. "You have kept that school standing in more ways than the staff may ever know. You gave it its rhythm, its memory, its heart." She had written of the assembly, of the stillness that fell over the gym when she spoke of him, of the way students whispered his name, realizing they had always known him without ever seeing him, and then the line that made his throat catch. "Foundations are rarely celebrated, Mr. Bell, but they are never forgotten." He paused there, closed his eyes. She went on. "In every great place, palace or school, it is the quiet hands that build what history later admires. We build palaces from people like you." It didn't feel like praise. It felt like recognition. She closed with, "May this letter remind you that you mattered every day, in every quiet way." Arthur didn't frame it immediately. He didn't know how. But later that evening, after setting down his mug, he stood in front of the photograph of his wife. She was smiling in it, sun on her cheek, hair pinned like always. He took out the old postcard that had been tucked behind the glass for years, a snapshot from Brighton Pier. And he gently slid the letter in its place. Her face still smiled. But now, beneath it, sat a note from a princess. A thank you written to a man most forgot, but who had never forgotten how to show up. And just as he turned to switch off the lamp, there it was again. Another knock at the door. But this time it wasn't the postman. He had just placed the letter behind glass when the next chapter came knocking. She remembered what others forgot, and she brought it back. It was a quiet afternoon when the knock came. Not urgent, not hesitant. Just, sure. Arthur opened the door slowly, wiping paint flecks from his hands. He wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not a little girl with a red backpack and a book tucked tightly under her arm. "Hi," she said without flinching. "Are you Mr. Arthur?" He blinked. That's me. She held the book out, both hands gripping the edges. We made this for you. Me and the class. He took it, unsure at first. The cover was cardboard, bound with yarn. On the front, in uneven marker strokes, it read, "Thank you, Mr. Arthur." He opened it. One page, then another, then another. Hand-drawn letters, crayon hearts, tiny sentences with big truths. Thank you for cleaning up the mess when I spilled juice. You always smiled at me even when I was in trouble. You made the hall smell like lemons. I like lemons. Arthur didn't speak. His throat tightened. The girl watched him closely. I never knew your name, she said, but I knew you made me feel safe. That's when it happened. He hadn't cried in years. Not since his brother passed. Not since his wife's funeral. But something in that small voice cracked him open in a way the loudest rooms never could. His eyes glistened. He pressed his fingers gently to the page, like it might fade if he didn't hold it still. She fidgeted for a moment, then asked softly, Can I come read with you sometimes? Like, after school, if you want? He looked at her, this tiny, certain, red backpacked reminder that the things we do quietly don't always disappear. He nodded, not because he had to, but because for the first time in a long time he wanted to. There was no speech, no official thank you. Just a cup of tea waiting on the counter and a storybook resting on the table half-read, ready to be picked up again. Arthur smiled gently, but what the girl didn't know was that he had a surprise for her too. Paint fades, but memory doesn't. Arthur stood before the long brick wall, brush in hand, just like he had nearly 4 decades ago. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Dozens of students, hands smudged with color, gathered around him. Some crouched, some stretched on ladders, others just watched, waiting for his nod before dipping their brushes. The school had invited him back not just to revisit the mural he'd painted in 1986, but to remake it. Together. Back then, it had been a sunrise, bright oranges and yellows peeking over hills, lined with silhouettes of children holding hands. He had painted it in the evenings, long after janitor shifts ended. No one asked him to. He just did. Now the sunrise was reborn. But this time, the silhouettes were real. The kids helped sketch their own outlines, laughing as Arthur corrected proportions, guiding them gently. Arms can be longer, he said with a wink. Hope always reaches further than we think. They painted backpacks, books, sneakers, even rollerblades. Some drew pets, others filled the sky with stars. And in the corner, the little girl with the red backpack, the same one who'd once whispered, "Is she a lawyer?" added something extra. A tiny gold crown, carefully tucked into the corner of the sky. Beneath it, she wrote in blue, "For Princess Catherine." Arthur noticed it later when the paint was still wet. He didn't say much, just smiled and shook his head softly. "They remember everything," he whispered. By the end of the week, the mural was complete. It stretched across the full entrance wall of the school. A living memory. They called it Arthur's Wall of Hope. A small plaque sat beneath it, not polished brass, just hand-carved wood with etched letters that read, "To the man who painted futures, not just walls." As the sun set that evening, the students signed their names in the lower corner. One by one. No rush. Like they knew they were part of something that wouldn't fade. Arthur didn't need applause. He didn't need titles. What he had now was better proof that what he built had lasted. And still, one final gesture waited in the wings. The mural told a story, but the surprise behind the stage curtain was about to finish it. He never wore a crown. But now, he had something. Better remembrance. The car arrived early, black and quiet, like it knew the day didn't need spectacle. Arthur didn't ask why Kensington had invited him. He just ironed his best shirt, polished his shoes, and packed nothing but silence in his coat pocket. He didn't enter through the main gates. Catherine had arranged a smaller entrance, a side garden past a low stone arch where roses grew with the kind of grace that didn't need pruning. There was no press, no portraits, just her, waiting in a pale blue dress, her hair swept back, her smile unguarded. She didn't curtsy. He didn't bow. They simply sat on a garden bench, beside a tray of tea, like old friends who had met somewhere between service and stillness. They spoke of years, of chalk dust and echoes in old hallways, of children who never learned your name but never forgot your kindness. She poured the tea herself. "Milk?" she asked. Arthur nodded. "And 1 sugar, just to pretend I'm fancy." She laughed, softly. "You've always been more royal than most of us," she said. He raised a brow. "I don't know about that." She leaned in slightly. "The best rooms in the world," she said, "are built by the hands no one applauds." Arthur looked down, eyes tracing the ridges of the teacup in his hands. "I just tried to be steady. Some days that's all I had." "That's everything," she said. They sat in quiet for a while. No need to fill it. The breeze did that, for them. And when it was time to leave, Catherine reached into her coat pocket and handed him a small box worn at the corners, blue velvet pressed thin with time. Inside, a pin. It wasn't official. It wasn't ceremonial. But it gleamed with something more sacred than status. A simple silver oak leaf, like the one that shaded his bench at the school playground. She didn't say what it meant. She didn't need to. Arthur held it for a long time like it might vanish if he blinked. And when he returned home, he didn't put it in a drawer. He wore it the next day. On the bench. By the tree. The children didn't ask what it was. They just sat beside him like always. One girl leaned against his side, her cheek against his sleeve. "Tell the fox story again," she whispered. Arthur smiled. And as another day passed, with laughter on the wind and grass beneath his feet, he waved at the teacher across the yard, nodded at the parent with the tired eyes, and sat quietly beneath the tree. No throne, no title, but a kingdom. Just the same, because sometimes the greatest legacy is simply not being forgotten. Not all crowns are worn. Some are carried in memory, in kindness, and in every name someone still remembers.